Okay, today's June 1st, 2021. The time is 1:22 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. The percentage of American citizens who've now been vaccinated continues to climb impressively. According to the Centers for Disease Control COVID data tracker, as of right now, 40.9% of the total population of the United States has been fully vaccinated against COVID 19. 40.9%. That is 135,867,425 people. Uh, there is even higher a number of people who've already received at least one dose. That brings the percentage up to 50.8%. So over half of the population of the United States, 168,489,729 US citizens have received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. That's a pretty encouraging number. And we're already starting to see life coming back to normal. We're already starting to see karaoke bars opening back up and people gathering for Memorial Day weekend, dispensing with their masks. You're starting to see more and more people in public spaces not wearing facial coverings and really embracing that. You can tell how relieved and relaxing it is for people to be able to breathe freely again. It's kind of nice to see. So that is a number which continues to climb. In my home state of Washington, 56.5% of the population of Washington have received at least one dose. The population of the state of Washington is 7.6 million, and easily, comfortably over half of us have received at least one dose of the vaccine. 46.4% of Washingtonians are now fully vaccinated. It's interesting if you look at NPR.org, for instance, has a pretty impressively designed map of the United States, which gives you a sense of where the strongest population of vaccinated people in the United States resides. So the state of Washington, state of California, both have percentages over 56% of people who've at least received one dose. You see that again in New Mexico, and then pretty much the entire eastern seaboard, with the exception of New York State and Delaware, are in the same category. When you get to the Midwest, those numbers drop below 42%. You have states like Indiana, West Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, etc. That whole region of the country seems pretty consistent with its numbers not quite as high as the other states that I've mentioned already. Um, so I don't know if there is a cultural reluctance versus a cultural enthusiasm to reach out and get this vaccination. Browsing through social media, you see a pretty broad spectrum of opinions, a polarizing spectrum of opinions about getting vaccinated and about a certain disdain that people might feel for those who are eager to be vaccinated and their opposition to those who feel an intense reluctance or flat out opposition to being vaccinated. That's just another debate that's raging on social media. Now, as the vaccination, uh, the percentage of vaccinated people grow higher and higher, there's another element to this, which is the renewed scrutiny of the way that the pandemic began. Um, and there are calls now to reform the World Health Organization, which is something that's been in the news since the pandemic began, because unfortunately the World Health Organization doesn't exactly have a stellar history, ethically speaking. There are almost constant accusations of corruption within the leadership of the WHO. Now, there is an open letter in Science Magazine, sciencemagazine.org. Investigate the origins of COVID 19. I'd like to share some of this letter with you. And this was published on May the 14th, so just over 2 weeks ago. On December 30th, 2019, the Program for Monitoring Emerging Diseases notified the world about a pneumonia of unknown cause in Wuhan, China. Since then, scientists have made remarkable progress in understanding the causative agent, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, also known as SARS CoV 2. its transmission, and mitigation by vaccines, therapeutics, and non pharmaceutical interventions. Yet more investigation is still needed to determine the origin of the pandemic. Theories of accidental release from a lab and zootonic spillover both remain viable. Knowing how COVID 19 emerged is critical for informing global strategies to mitigate the risk of future outbreaks. In May 2020, the World Health Assembly requested that the World Health Organization Director General work closely with partners to determine the origins of COVID. In November, the terms of reference for a China World Health Organization joint study were released. The information, data, and samples for the study's first phase were collected and summarized by the Chinese half of the team. The rest of the team built on this analysis. Although there were no findings in clear support of either a natural spillover or lab accident, the team assessed a zootonic spillover from an intermediate host as likely to very likely and a laboratory incident as extremely unlikely. Furthermore, the two theories were not given balanced consideration. Only 4 of the 313 pages of the report and its annexes address the possibility of a laboratory accident. Notably, the World Health Organization Director General Tedros commented that the report's consideration of evidence supporting a laboratory accident was insufficient and offered to provide additional resources to fully evaluate the possibility. As scientists with relevant expertise, we agree with the World Health Organization Director General, the United States, and 13 other countries and the European Union that greater clarity about the origins of this pandemic is necessary and feasible to achieve. And it just goes on and on and on. What is obvious to me is that this renewed scrutiny of the origins of the pandemic has already adopted a very thick political component to it. We have members of the mainstream media in the United States readily admitting that the reason that they were so dismissive of this idea at the outset was because of the people who were promoting it. Obviously, this was back during the Trump administration. And so members of his administration, and members of the media who were sympathetic to his ideology were the ones promoting this idea. And as such, the reflexive, reactive attitude of his opposition, both in politics and in the media, was to completely dismiss the lab leak theory as being unviable, as being oriented in racism, and as being not worth the consideration of any stable minded American citizen. That attitude has been completely discarded, and now there is a lot of reason to believe that the lab leak theory is feasible and perhaps even likely. And I can definitely see how any investigation into either possibility, the possibility of a lab leak or a zootonic origin, it's going to be hard to say because we're going to be in large part reliant on the honesty and transparency of the Chinese government to help determine the genuine origins of this. Um, and I think that we are going to have a hard time being able to trust what is released or said to us by the Chinese government. Also, there's just going to be so much debate and so much impassioned arguing going on about this topic that it's not going to be possible to separate, shall we say, the wheat from the chaff and know what the truly viable and actionable information is versus whatever is being coddled together for political or ideological reasons. So this is going to be a debate whose ramifications are going to extend decades into the future, and it's going to be it's going to be interesting to say the least in terms of how it's going to affect diplomatic relations between the U.S. and China, relations which have already been strained for quite some time. So, with that being said, I think that the Biden administration had pointed at a July 4th, like an Independence Day, where we get to declare independence, not just in celebration of Independence Day, but also independence from the virus. So they're, I think, probably planning some pretty strong PR campaign in that regard, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, it could be this sort of cathartic release, blissful and celebratory, and I really hope that does sort of spell the end of this. And I hope that the national attention is drawn away from the more dramatic parts of this debate and this investigation, and that our attention is drawn elsewhere, perhaps in even a more positive or constructive way, so that the investigation into this can be allowed to proceed without the interference of sensational partisanism. So yeah, that's where things are with the headlines for right now, and there's plenty more to come. And I'll be happily keeping an eye on things. So, with that, I'm going to just keep it short today. I appreciate anybody who's watching. Take care.